You know, for most of human history, medicine wasn't really a science. It was, well, it was more like a terrifying field of guesswork, pure superstition, and just horrifying trial and error. And you are not going to believe some of the cures they actually came up with. So, you've got a splitting headache, right? Can't seem to shake that migraine. Today, you'd probably just reach for some ibuprofen. But for centuries, yeah, the prescription was a little different.
Yep, that's right. For a long time in Europe, one of the go-to cures for any kind of head pain was a powder made from a ground-up human skull. And believe it or not, that is honestly one of the tamer remedies we're about to get into.
All right, first up, let's talk about cures that didn't even require a trip to the apothecary. Nope, the key ingredient was something you already had on you, because, well, you produced it yourself.
So the Romans, right? They were famously meticulous about their dental hygiene. So how in the world did they get those pearly whites without any modern toothpaste? Yeah, you might want to brace yourself for this one.
The secret ingredient was urine, and I'm not kidding. The famous Roman philosopher Seneca was a huge fan of gargling it. They actually believed the ammonia in it acted as this powerful cleansing and whitening agent, and get this, he wasn't the only one.
And look, this wasn't some weird niche thing. Urine was basically a multi-purpose miracle liquid. I mean, in medieval Europe, it was used as a facial cleanser when fresh water was hard to come by. The Romans used it for their laundry. Some cultures even drank it, believing it could cure literally everything from allergies to cancer. Wild.
Okay, so as bizarre as using urine sounds, somehow the way they diagnosed illnesses was even stranger. It all came down to this one core medical theory that totally dominated medicine for over 2,000 years.
This was the theory of the four humors. The whole idea was pretty simple, really. If you were sick, it was because one of your bodily fluids was out of whack. We're talking your blood, your phlegm, your yellow bile, your black bile. It was all supposed to be in this delicate, perfect balance. So the big question is, how did an ancient Greek doctor figure out which of your humors was out of balance? Well, it's simple. They tasted them. I am not joking. They tasted everything. We're talking earwax, mucus, vomit, even pus from a wound. They were actually taught what a healthy fluid was supposed to taste like, so a quick little sample could tell them exactly what was wrong with you. Can you even imagine?
All right, but what happens when the human body just isn't enough to provide a cure? Well, that's when doctors turn to the animal kingdom for some, let's just say, truly wild ingredients.
And speaking of the Romans, they got even more creative with their dental care. I mean, we already know about the urine mouthwash, but to really get that fresh breath feeling, you know what they'd do? They'd mix in some crushed up mouse brains for good measure. Yeah, mouse brains. Okay, look, as disgusting as mouse brain toothpaste sounds, it probably wasn't going to kill you, but the same definitely can't be said for this next so-called cure, which happens to be one of the earliest recorded forms of birth control. So this was actually documented in the Ebers Papyrus, which is one of the oldest medical texts in history. The idea was that this paste would form a physical barrier. But, you know the reality? The reality was that inserting animal waste into one of the most sensitive parts of the human body was pretty much a guaranteed recipe for a horrific infection and all kinds of diseases. So we've gone from the human body to animals, and now we're going back to humans. And this next category of medicine, this wasn't practiced by some isolated faraway tribe. No. This was a widespread belief right in the heart of quote-unquote civilized Europe for hundreds of years. They called it corpse medicine, and it operated on a really simple if completely gruesome principle. Like cures like. So to fix a headache, you consume part of a head. To cure a blood disease, you drink blood. The whole idea was that you could literally consume the vitality and the strength of a dead person to heal yourself. And oh, they took this literally. At public executions, it was actually pretty common for people, especially those who were suffering from epilepsy, to pay the executor for a warm cup of blood, fresh from the person who was just executed. They'd just drink it right there. But maybe the single most horrifying example of this comes from a 17th century German physician. He suggested that a jerky made from the flesh of a red-headed man was a potent treatment for all sorts of illnesses. I guess gingers have just been getting a raw deal for centuries, huh?
Okay, so sometimes the cure didn't actually involve eating or drinking something disgusting. No, instead, doctors would deliberately infect their patients with an entirely new disease, one that was often way deadlier than what they started with.
Let's take syphilis, for example. Before penicillin was discovered, one of the leading treatments for advanced syphilis was to infect the patient with malaria, on purpose. The whole idea was that the crazy high fever you get from malaria would kill off the syphilis bacteria. And get this, for this discovery, the doctor who came up with it actually won a Nobel Prize in 1927.
There was just one, tiny problem. The treatment only had a success rate of about 25%. So, for the other 75% of patients, they either died from the malaria they were just given, or the treatment just failed completely, leaving them with both syphilis and malaria. What a deal.
And for our final category, let's look at the actual tools of the trade. We're talking about procedures where the medical instrument itself was the source of pure, unadulterated terror.
Listen, if you think hemorrhoids are bad today, just be so grateful you're not living in ancient Greece. The treatment prescribed by none other than Hippocrates himself, the father of medicine, was to take a red-hot iron and just shove it directly into the patient's anus to burn and cauterize the swollen veins.
And in his own words, Hippocrates literally instructed doctors to hold the patient down specifically so their screams would help make the rectum project more, so it would expose the area better. This wasn't just a treatment, it was an exercise in pure agony, prescribed by the most famous doctor in history.
So when you look back at these so-called cures, from corpse jerky to crocodile dung, it's pretty easy to feel relieved by how far we've come, right? But it also makes you wonder, doesn't it? What seemingly normal medical practices that we use today are going to be the subject of some horrifying history explainer just like this one 100 years from now?